Hi, I'm Ksenia, and I'm so excited to be sharing with you today the chart of Jim Carrey. We're going to go through his astrological indicators and see if we can make sense of the life that he's lived and the man that he is. And for those of you who have been living under a rock for the last 30 years or so, Jim Carrey rose to prominence in the early 90s with films such as The Mask, Ace Ventura, and Dumb and Dumber. They were his sort of three big initiatory hits. But he's also done a lot of serious work as well, things like The Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind, The Truman Show, which was outstanding. It's my eldest son's favourite movie and has been since he was about 6 years old. He adores that film. One of my personal favourites and a lesser known one is The Majestic. And there's just, look, there's a wealth of, well, you know, the typical phrase, a great body of work done by Jim Carrey over the last 30 years for adults, for children. And he has this incredible ability to, well, mutate, if you like, into the characters that he's playing or the person that he's playing. It's like almost like, well, the ability to channel the spirit of, for example, Andy Kaufman when he played Andy Kaufman in the Man on the Moon film. That's one example, but many more. He just has this incredible ability, adaptability, flexibility to really embody the Grinch or whoever it happens to be that he's playing. So with that in mind, I wanted to explore his chart and just see who is this man, what goes into his life story. Let's have a look a bit at his biography and what was impacting his life at certain times. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to cut to his chart and we'll go through his chart, but then I also want to look at the progressed chart at certain points in his life and what that indicated and how that revealed what was happening for him in reality, in the real third dimension, as well as the reflection that was occurring in his sky through progressions and transits. And then I want to finish up this video, and I can talk for ages. Anyone who's had a reading with me will know I can blah 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 for a long time, so I'll try and contain it to a acceptable length. But I really wanted to look at, well, what's coming up in Jim Carrey's life? What's he going through at the moment in terms of transits? And how is that impacting him? And because he's such a public figure in the public realm, it's very easy to see with people who are celebrities and in the top sort of level of the celebrity sphere, get the words right, it's their lives are on a public stage and available for people to see, which must be a bit traumatic at times, especially for people who are very private types of people. But that's the way life works, I guess, for celebrities and in the spotlight. So we can look and see, well, this is the transits that are occurring, and this is what perhaps is manifesting for him in his life over the past year or so, and what we can expect to see happening for him in the upcoming months and years ahead. So join me now. It's going to be a lot of fun and it's going to be very interesting if you want to learn a little bit about Jim Carrey and also about how to read a chart and what things we look for and what things play out in the synchronicities. That is the key word. I love that word. What are the synchronicities that we can see reflecting from the skies above in the human being? And whenever I do a reading for anyone, I always like to point out that we are mere mortals interpreting the language of the gods. And as we know, science is discovering amazing new things about the universe, about our solar system and beyond, all the time. And astrology, it's an ancient science, but it's also keeping up, I guess, too, with current new discoveries and how they impact us and what aspects and what, you know, planets and asteroids and new star heavenly bodies are impacting on our lives. So keep that in mind. You know, this is the language of the gods, the language of the universe, and we are mere mortals doing our best to understand this heavenly language. So let's go.
Okay, so here we have an image of Jim Carrey's chart, and you'll notice that some key things that stand out. We always look first, well, I always look first for the positions of the sun, the moon, and the ascendant in any chart. It's what is commonly referred to as the Primal Triad. And for Jim, that is the sun in Capricorn in the 3rd house. I use whole sign astrology. And the moon in the 8th house in whole sign astrology in Gemini, and the ascendant being Scorpio. So they're the main elements that give him his foundation and his character, and we'll go into more of that as we go along with this assessment. But I want to look firstly at the things that stick out to me, the things that leap out off the page when I see this most powerful chart, and it is a very, very powerful chart. One of the first things I see is the capacity for world-changing ability. And I recently wrote an article for Lada about the significators of world-changing ability, being one of the celestial planets, Pluto, Uranus, or Neptune, on an angle or with the sun or the moon. That's the general easy interpretation of that. So when I look at Jim's chart, what does he have? He has Neptune on the ascendant in Scorpio. It's very powerful in Scorpio. Neptune likes to be in water signs. Water signs flow. Water signs, even though Scorpio is the fixed water sign, it's still a water sign, about feelings, about emotion, about depth. And Neptune is all about divine love, divine creativity, divine spirituality. It's about healing. And I'll talk a little more in a minute about the role of Neptune on Jim's ascendant, which is extremely powerful for him. Then you've also got Uranus. And Uranus is way up the top there in the 10th house, only just in the 10th house, and practically conjunct the midheaven, the MC. This is an enormously powerful place for Uranus to be, and indicates that he is going to be highly Uranian. So Jim is this combination of a highly Neptunian person, and we'll talk about that in a minute, and a highly Uranian person. We'll also talk about that in a minute as well. So there are two really, really powerful placements for these celestial planets, and they also represent the inner realm, when you've got an iceberg and you see a portion above the ocean and there's so much more below. Well, that's like the subconscious. And the celestial planets rule our subconscious life. So to have them in such prominent positions means there's a lot of subconscious energy there and powerful world-changing capacity. So that's the first thing that jumps out at me. And we'll explore these in more depth as I go along. The second thing that jumps out at me with this chart is the fact that Jim has a Singleton Moon. Now, if you look at the chart, you can see on the right-hand side when you're looking at it, the moon is the only visible planet in that, or any planet for that matter, in the right-hand side of the chart, the side on the right of that meridian line that runs MC to IC, cutting it in half. And the moon is all out on its own there. This makes the moon extremely powerful in anyone's chart. If you've got a singleton in a hemisphere, like a side of the pie, if you like, all by itself, this gives prominence to the things that planet represent. And what does the moon represent? It represents emotional life and how we present our emotions, how we display our emotions, and what we need emotionally in life to feel fulfilled. So with this emotional planet as a singleton, it gives the moon like just an enormous amount of power in Jim's chart. And we'll also explore this in a minute, what the moon represents. But for Jim, but not only is the moon a singleton, and that makes it extra powerful, but it's a lonely moon. It's what's considered a lonely moon, and that is when you do not have any other planets in the sign before or after where the moon is. So in this case, there are no planets in the sign of Taurus. The moon is then in Gemini, and then there's no planets in the sign of Cancer, which makes the moon in inverted commas, a lonely moon. and in the 8th house. So we'll talk about all that in a minute as well, but I just wanted to point out the significant elements of Jim's chart. And then the other thing that is particularly important that I see is a phenomenally strong stellium. Now, it's an out-of-sign stellium, and what that means is that it crosses 2 signs. But all these 6 planets, and you'll see them down in Capricorn, which is the 3rd house from the ascendant, and Aquarius, the 4th house from the ascendant in whole sign astrology, you have Mars, Venus, the Sun, Saturn, Neptune, and Mercury. So 6 out of the 7 visible planets all huddled up within 30 degrees of one another. Very intense energy. Stelliums are a powerful energy, a real powerhouse of creativity, and they represent a divine destiny for anyone who carries a strong stellium. And this is a really strong one. 6 planets is pretty hefty stuff. It means all the energy of these planets and all the energy that those planets represent as lord of the houses of his horoscope is condensed into one tiny area of the chart, and that can give a feeling of lack in other areas of the chart, but an intense capacity and focus and spiritual destiny related to where these planets sit. And for Jim, this is the 3rd house of communication. So he's a remarkable communicator through film, but also through writing, because he's a book author as well. So definitely this creative, energetic capacity in the house of communication, media, that includes film and written works, and so there's powerful energy there. And then also in Aquarius, which is his 4th house, which receives some of this energy as well. So there's 3 planets in each sign that form this stellium. And so, this is the 4th house where there's kind of an energy related to his lineage, his heritage, his roots somehow. And, that can take many forms. Sometimes it can be that there's a creative energy there where you want to make your family proud, or you want to really boost the reputation and the image of your family, or compensate for some area where there was lack in your family, and your family history and your family dynamics. So all this kind of stuff can play out, and with Aquarius too, it's that highly eccentric, brilliant, creative genius sign. So all this stuff is mingling in a really dense capacity in Jim's stellium down there. So that's the 3rd thing that really leaps out at me in this chart. So I thought what I might do is explore those components in greater depth, and let's take a real look at them and what they are actually doing for Jim Carrey in his life. So let's firstly jump to Jim's ascendant, where we find Neptune sitting, a couple of degrees off the ascendant degree. This is considered the conjunction of Neptune with the ascendant. And I probably should point out the ascendant degree is 15 degrees of Scorpio. What is the degree of 15 degrees? It's the degree of Gemini. So Gemini is that highly intelligent energy. It's the witty jester of the zodiac. It's the entertainer. It's the person who loves to be center of all the action, where all the activity is, and it loves to be part of whatever's going down. It wants to be there. It wants to be at the center, and it's that very, I'll describe it as a very fresh, light breeze. It's an airy quality. Gemini is an air sign, and so this degree of Gemini has this fresh, light, breezy quality to it that's very fun-loving, youthful, witty. So keep that in mind. Yes, he's got his ascendant in Scorpio, which is deep and intense emotionally and very psychic and profound, but it's also got this Gemini quality. And so we see that in Jim with his, you know, his breeziness, his wittiness, his humour, liking to be where the action is, but at the same time, he also likes his own privacy and takes time out to retreat and to meditate. And that is seen by the scorpionic qualities. And the intensity of his emotions is often played out in his characters. Like, he really encompasses his characters like nobody else. It's quite amazing, his capacity to mutate, as I said before, into the characters that he plays. But what I really want to look at is the life or world-changing capacity of Neptune there. Neptune on the ascendant. Well, what is Neptune? Neptune is spiritualism, it's idealism, it's unconditional love and unwavering belief. It's compassion, it's charity, it's love. And so we've got Neptune here, and all these things sort of meld into the character of Jim Carrey. So it makes him highly Neptunian. If you've got a planet conjunct your ascendant, then you have the qualities of those planets that planet in abundance. And this makes Jim a Neptunian person, meaning that he can find material reality harsh. You know, his vibration of kindness, compassion, and unconditional love can be met with what we call vampirism, as like the material realm can suck life energy out of people who are Neptunian. Idealism can transform into, you know, for some people, suffering and martyrdom. Now, I'm not saying that this is what's happened with Jim at all, but this is the, you know, what defines a Neptunian person. And there's probably been times in Jim's life where he has overgiven, because Neptune is very much that way, where it will give and give and give to another. And so he in his creative sphere, in his career, he goes beyond the nth degree to become the character, to get into the spirit of the person he is portraying, or to create the character. And this is a very Neptunian approach to who we are. Neptunian people are gentle, soulful, giving, charitable people. And they are some of the kindest and most refined, most imaginative people around. It's really a beautiful, divine energy. So, you know, divinely inspired imagination, divinely inspired creativity and spirituality coming from other realms. And of course, this is all in the sign of Scorpio. So it's intense divine spirituality. It's intense divine creativity, which is what gives Jim the capacity to almost channel other people. Now, I'm not sure if you've seen the documentary about Jim portraying Andy Kaufman, but I highly recommend you watch it if you're interested in this type of thing, because as I was watching it, I'm like, oh, that's Neptune. There's Neptune again. There's Neptune again, as he just embodies this other person and loses himself. This is highly Neptunian. They do tend to lose themselves quite a bit, actually, when they are, you know, it carries the energy of Pisces. Neptune rules Pisces, and so Neptune loses, Pisces adapts to the people that it's with. It becomes what it thinks they want them to be. And so Neptune is the embodiment of that. It becomes what it expects other people, what it thinks other people want them to be. And so it can take Neptunian people a very long time in life to actually know who they really are, because they're so busy, not necessarily trying to please other people, but trying to be what it thinks other people want, or what other people expect of them. And you can be like that towards your parents, towards your bosses, towards your, you know, your large groups of people even. So it's probably taken Jim a number of years to really come into his own, to really understand himself, and to really get a sense of who he really is instead of the characters that he plays. Higher manifestations of Neptune are the kind of people who will persevere with their hopes and their beliefs, you know, despite empty times that come to us all. We all feel those times of loneliness and emptiness, and Neptune people experience this quite profoundly. But you know, people with the higher manifestations of Neptune, and I believe Jim is one of these people, have the capacity to cling to their faith, to cling to their beliefs. And when I say faith, I'm not talking about religious faith, I'm talking about his belief system. And he's come out a lot lately speaking about his understanding of who he is as not as a human body or a human shell with a spirit inside, but you know, as you know, it's kind of hard to put into words, but it's got a lot to do with the loss of ego and the fact that we are all one, which is a highly Neptunian ideology. So yeah, he will continue to cling to his belief system and his understanding of higher realms, despite the empty times that he has, as we know, experienced through depression or the need to retreat and so forth. Neptunian people can and sometimes appear to be a little bit floaty, a bit detached, and no, as if they're waiting for the magic of life to happen, or a bit confused perhaps about what they want. And I read a recent statement of Jim's lately where he was saying he no longer has ambition. He's achieved all he wants to achieve. You know, he's desired to achieve, and now he's kind of a bit floaty. You know, doesn't really desire to achieve anything more. And if we look at where Neptune is by transit, Neptune is in Pisces, which is Jim. Looking at the chart here again, Pisces is Jim Carrey's 5th house of entertainment. It's that leadership Leo quality is the 5th house. And so with Neptune here, it's natural that he will feel a bit floaty, a bit detached, a bit sort of loose with regard to what he wants to achieve in the entertainment industry, that he's so much a part of and has been so much a part of for so many years. This all makes perfect sense with Neptune spending roughly 14 years transiting the 5th house of entertainment. So what else do we see with Neptune? Well, we need to look at the house that Neptune's in. Yes, he's very Neptunian because it's on the ascendant, but it's also the 1st house. The 1st house represents our physical appearance. So with Neptune here, I mean, people with Neptune in the 1st house look dreamy and ethereal, and there is always, if you're a Pisces person or if you've got Neptune in the 1st house, there's going to be something about your eyes that's mesmerizing, that draws people in, and I would definitely say that's the case with Jim Carrey. There's you know, Neptune is very glamorous, so there's this aura of glamorousness, a transcendent appearance with this. You know, I'm not saying Jim is always dressed glamorously, and you know, there's been times in his life when he's sported that Grizzly Adams beard and what have you, but there's a general aura of you know, of soulfulness and glamorousness about him as a person. It's quite captivating. And so, you know, we've got the soulful, the large expressive eyes, a great ability to present himself on film or in photographs, which is ruled by Neptune. But then there's also this compassion and sensitivity here. So if you see any interviews with Jim Carrey where he's not actually acting or in character, or being, as he's termed it himself, the Hyde character that he becomes, the very nice Hyde character he becomes when he's acting or in public. If you see the real Jim in an interview or whatever, there is this great compassion and sensitivity, this gentleness about him that's very compelling. Now with this position, especially as it's in Scorpio, there is a natural propensity to be very psychic and to have channeling abilities, as we know and we've seen with his acting. But with this energy, you know, people with Neptune on the ascendant, and if you've got Neptune on the ascendant or Neptune strong in your chart, as I also do, you need to be very wary of the energies that are around you, because you tend to soak up all these concepts and things in the invisible realms. So you be discerning. Don't be carried away by illusion, which Neptune can be very, if Neptune has a lot of hard aspects, can be very deceptive, and you can be, misguided, so to speak. Generally, I mean, if you look at Jim's chart, he's got the apex of I've gone blank on the name of the triangle. It's not a grand trine, it's the bisextile triangle. And the apex of that is Neptune, giving it extra more power because it's that pivotal planet in that bisextile triangle shape. So there's, the two sextile angles from, in this case, it's Mars, Venus, and from Pluto, impacting on the Neptune. And there's that one difficult aspect, which is the square from Mercury, Jupiter happening as well. But as I said, Neptune in the first house means that you have this psychic ability, and your dreams will be very vivid and prophetic. You have an ability to, your dreams are so real, and you're like, oh, there is something the universe is trying to tell me through my dreams. They oftentimes can feel more real than waking life sometimes for some people. And I've said this, the Neptune strong gives you an ability as a great actor, and you manifest the characters that you play so easily. But as I said before, it can take some time to discover your true self, because it can be obscured by this ability to transform with the energies around you. And this is all connected to that psychic ability to pick up on the energies around you, or the energies in other realms even. So this is, if you, again, I refer back to that interview, a documentary about Andy Kaufman's The Man on the Moon film. It's quite probable that Jim was actually tapping into Andy Kaufman's, energy and channeling him. In fact, it mentions at one point that Andy Kaufman's daughter came to meet with him while he was in this zone of being Andy Kaufman, because she'd never actually interacted with her father, and she wanted to meet him. So she came to meet him via Jim and his channeling abilities, which is so Neptunian. With this position, the body can be particularly sensitive. The first house rules the body, and Neptune rules fluids. So I'm not going to go into all the possible health concerns that Jim might be susceptible to, because that's his private business. But Neptune does rule fluids, and so there's any sort of health issues connected to fluids can be prominent in a person's life when they have this position. So this is Neptune when it's conjunct the ascendant, making you a highly Neptunian person. Those psychic abilities and abilities to channel, fantastic acting capacity because of that, and very glamorous, very romantic, very ethereal, and very not intrigued by spirituality and mysticism and those sorts of things, but not intrigued, but actually just able to flow with those things, to get them, to understand them in ways that a lot of other people may not. There is a real individualization, shall I say, that comes with being able to just see things that other people can't, and that can give some loneliness sometimes. And remember, I said Neptune is connected to Pisces energy. Pisces people often feel very alone in the world, because they see things so differently, so divinely, from a divine perspective, and the world is a material realm that we exist in. So there's a real contradiction. We live in a Saturnian world. Saturn is very earthy, and Neptune's the opposite. It's very ethereal and divine. It's other realms. And so because of that, highly Neptunian people can struggle with earthly reality, this Saturnian opposite reality to the one that they exist in their mind and in their inner life. So, you know, I have a great compassion when I hear Jim speaking about his beliefs and his understanding of the world, because not everyone's going to get what he's talking about. But people who are highly Neptunian will be like, aha, yeah, I get that. That makes sense. Now, speaking about being opposite to Saturn, Jim is also highly Uranian. And I love Uranus is one of my favorite planets. It is the most creative planet. It is the planet of genius, of inspiration. It's also the planet of prophecy. And again, we've got that psychic connection there. It's about intuition and rebelliousness. And it is so powerful because it is conjunct an angle in Jim's chart. And the 10th house is where Uranus is actually most powerful. It will impact his whole life. And what is he known for? Not only his spirituality, but his eccentric nature and his, you know, not so much rebelliousness, but just he will not do what you expect him to do. He will do the opposite of what you expect him to do. And that's beautiful. There is such vibrant energy and creativity there. So Uranus wants to liberate people from the shackles of Saturn. So Jim has come to, you know, expose truth and authenticity because, you know, Uranus does not tolerate secrets. Uranus wants to free us more than anything. And so how is Jim manifesting that? He is doing that through the 10th house on the midheaven. What is 10th house? Career. And what has he done with his career? He has brought creativity, eccentricity, genius brilliance to his portrayals in movies and to his comedy. And okay, a lot of people sometimes might not get, it's quite Kaufman-esque, his comedic style, and it's very physical. But it's brought something new, something fresh, something almost liberating to the career realm of, you know, film comedy that Jim embodies. So when we've got Uranus in the 10th house, it means that when we've got this position, we absolutely cannot do structure or rules to do with career. So, you know, he's not going to abide by the general requirements of the film industry, you know, and the expectations of the film industry. He cannot work a 9-to-5 job. He's going to do it his way because there is this independent, autonomous energy with Uranus in the 10th house. He must find his own career path, usually in some kind of independent form. Now, with Uranus in the house of career, it can also mean you will have sudden success overnight. And what happened with Jim? He'd been practicing comedy for many years, and then bang, he got the role of Ace Ventura, and things just went from there. Ace Ventura, Dumb and Dumber, The Mask launched him. Those 3 films are very, very pivotal and launched him into like a career where he is now in the top 5% of his industry. You know, the very powerful movers and shakers in Hollywood. And that's also seen, I might add, by the sun in the house of Capricorn. The sun actually rules Leo, which is Jim's 10th house. The sun is the lord of Leo, and it's in the sign of Capricorn, making him the energy of Capricorn is the CEO or the boss and the person who is most powerful. So he's in that top 5% of people in Hollywood who can pull a great role, who can earn more than others, who can, you know, make his own decisions and say what goes, because he is in that powerful, influential position. Sun in Capricorn, ruler of Leo, the sign of the kings, and the sign of, you know, the entertainer, the rock star, the god of, if you like, of the entertainment industry, the superstar, all connected. But Uranus is there as well, so that sudden success can happen, you know, instantaneously, like almost. Also with Uranus in the 10th house, people that with this position, they don't tend to like authority, and they don't become friends with their bosses usually, but their relationships are without hierarchical structure. So that means that for Jim, you know, there's not going to be you know, they're up there, you know, the studio executives or whatever, and I'm down here. There's none of that. We're all on an equal footing. This is very Uranian. There is no hierarchy. We are all equal. And that's a really fabulous energy of Uranus. I love that. Sometimes there can be a dabbling in many occupations when you've got Uranus in the career house. So, you know, Jim has tried serious roles, he's tried comedic roles, he's written books. And before he was in acting, he was doing comedy, stand-up comedy, and he was on TV with the show In Living Colour with Jamie Foxx. And then there was also before that, before he went into the entertainment industry, he was working in factories and jobs around sort of the Toronto area where he grew up. So there's this, you know, having experienced many occupations, but I mean, obviously the dominant one is that film industry, which is the highly Neptunian influence. There's a need for Jim to do something with an authentic purpose related to who they are, you know. So he's got this interesting interplay between Neptune and Uranus, where he needs to discover who he is because he's channeling these other characters as Neptune, but he has a need to be authentic and real, and he is that. He is Jim Carrey. I mean, there's nobody else like him. He is an authentic human being, not trying to be anybody else other than when he's acting, if you know what I mean. When he's being a character, he is very authentic. There is no replica of Jim Carrey out there. And he is a revolutionary, and revolutionaries are very tied to the Uranian energy. If you've got Uranus in the 10th house, you will bring something revolutionary to your career. Interestingly enough, Lada has Uranus in the 10th house, and she has revolutionized astrology through the internet. Perfect. So, yeah, Uranus rules astrology. It wouldn't surprise me one little bit if Jim actually gets it, understands astrology, and has used astrology to further his career at some point, or perhaps continually. There's a definite capacity for that through the position of Uranus in his chart. So they're those two world-changing planets, and he has revolutionized comedy. He has been a mover and a shaker, and brought a lot of you know, brought back, if you like, that very physical comedy that perhaps had not been around so much. You know, we've had periods of like the Jerry Seinfeld's observational comedy, and the, you know, sitcom kind of stuff, and then we get the Robin Williamses who also did the physical comedy, and Jim, who's going to bring that different style of comedy back into the public realm. I'm thinking it was years since that sort of thing had been as predominant as it has been with Jim now. So the next thing we wanted to explore in more depth is this moon position. Now, I'm sorry if I'm sitting on this chart and it's boring to look at, but if you are into astrology, it's so helpful to see the visual and to get a picture of what's connecting to what rules what, where is everything. I find the visual just so helpful. And if I'm listening on audio to, say, one of Lada's teaching lessons or interviews and what have you, I'm seeing it in my head anyway. You know, I very rarely actually sit and watch the presenter. I've got the visual of my own chart in my head, and I'm seeing how what they're talking about plays out in my own chart. It's so helpful. We are a visual society. So forgive me if this is boring for you, to just have the chart sitting up there. But we look at Jim's moon now, and as I said, it's a singleton in one half of his horoscope, split in two by the MC to the IC. Now, I should mention that in evolutionary astrology, this is representative of, this split represents one half being fate and the other half being free will. The side of free will is where all Jim's planets fall except for the moon. So Jim has this great capacity for free will, and this is why, my understanding is, he has been able to manifest things easily in his life. You know, he can write himself a $10 million check and make it come to life, because all these powerful Neptune, Uranus, stellium energies give support to that. And this is the law of attraction stuff, where, you know, you say it so in your mind and you believe it with your heart and it comes into being. But that's only one way of doing life. And I hate to say this to all the devotees of law of attraction, but is also the other side, which is fate, where you must go with the flow, and whether, no matter how many checks for $10 million you write yourself, you are never going to manifest it, because your planets may not support that kind of eventuality in your life. Now for Jim it does. So he has the capacity to enact free will, to make a choice, and it manifests for him. If you are like me, who has the opposite to that, you must learn to go with the flow. You must allow the universe to have its way with you and guide you where it wants you to be, so that you'll learn what you need to learn this lifetime. And both paths are valid. Both paths are real. But for Jim, the sign of fate, the side, I should say, the hemisphere of fate, has only one planet, and that's the moon. So there may have been times in Jim's life where his emotional nature, he feels like he has no control over. And that's exactly the case. It's governed by fate. And fate, because it's about Jim learning something new, something that his soul has perhaps agreed on before this lifetime, or that is part of his destiny. I mean, the moon is such a karmic planet. He is here to learn lessons regarding the moon and to invoke karma from past lifetimes with regard to the karmic planet of the moon. And so this is a really powerful singleton in Jim's chart, the moon. He is he's working through the emotional issues are going to be some big things for him, because it's not something he can control. And with a loaded hemisphere of free will, having that singleton is a challenge, because he's not familiar with that, you know. Although by his age, he's sort of roughly around 56, this is going to be easier as you get older. He's more familiar with it, and yep, I can trust my emotions, and I flow with my emotions. I let them go where they need to go, because that is what fate is all about. So that is how I interpret the division of fate and free will in a chart, especially a chart like this one where it's so predominant. But it's in the 8th house of Gemini. So emotionally for Gemini, you know, he will feel emotionally fulfilled by Gemini things. The ruler of Gemini is actually conjunct Jupiter in the 4th house. So Gemini things are expanded by Jupiter. You know, Mercury is expanded by Jupiter, but guess what? It's in the sign of Aquarius. And that means learning, which is represented by Mercury, is not going to be conventional for Jim. And if Jim went to a conventional school, as I believe he did, he would have found it a challenge to learn, because it is, you know, the Aquarius energy does not fit with our very Saturnian educational structured systems. He probably struggled to, you know, buckle down and learn in a conventional sense. What he needed was the much more Aquarian, explorative, creative, genius style learning, which is not offered and certainly wasn't offered in the 60s when Jim was at primary school. That's just a little on the Mercury energy. So what did Jim do? He channeled the other side of Mercury, Mercury / Gemini energy, which is the class clown, the comedic, the person who made everybody laugh, the person who was funny. So, you know, he's steered away from that, I can't cope with this conventional learning system. I am going to be the eccentric, creative, funny man. And that is where that element is coming out. Also his ascendant degree, but that's where that playful comedic energy is coming from with Jim. But we back to the moon. Sorry, I get distracted. The moon in the 8th house. This position is especially sensitive to hidden undercurrents and darker feelings because the 8th house is about hidden things. And so again, it's a psychic position for the moon, for Jim's chart. The moon is that emotional nature. The 8th house is highly psychic. It's again about, you know, secrets and hidden things and understanding other realms. You know, so there is this very strong spiritual psychic element to Jim Carrey. Sorry about this, just a second. I'm gathering my thoughts. So it's a highly sensitive energy as well. Like the moon is our emotional sensitivity. And so with the moon in the 8th house, it means that we become extremely sensitive to hidden things such as lies. Like we can see, and I say we because I've got the moon in the 8th house as well, we can see through people who are lying to us or manipulating us or abusing our trust. And this can make us sick. Like, you know, we just want to cut ourselves off from people who are manipulating, doing those hidden 8th house things. We can emotionally pick up on that, psychically pick up on that and say, enough. Don't want any of that in my life. So the 8th house rules abuse of any kind. And, you know, it's quite likely that with the moon in the 8th house, we have had to experience some kind of psychological, maybe even physical abuse, if not in this life, then in a past life. Because as I said, the moon is highly karmic. So I'm not saying that Jim Carrey has had psychological or physical abuse in this lifetime. I'm not saying that, but there is a reaction to, say, maybe a past life where that was possibly the case. And now he's come into this life and carries the burden of this early life or past life trauma, and his soul has decided to heal that in this lifetime because of this 8th house moon position. So if we've got a moon in the 8th house and we suppress our painful memories of trauma without working consciously on releasing them in healthy ways, then addiction or mental health issues can appear. We need to be Uranian to deal with this. We need to be authentic and honest and straight up about our issues. So this position is a difficult placement for the moon. It means, you know, lots of problems on a psychological level that we're going to need to work through. There's going to be a need to process. And so with this, and also with the Scorpio ascendant that Jim has, he will need times apart from people to process, to think through. And, you know, Louise Hay used to talk about mirror work, talking to yourself in the mirror, like, and discussing ideas is something that people with this position can tend to do as a way of self-processing. And the right way, if you've got this placement yourself, the right way to go about finding peace and respite from drama and the constant reversals. This 8th house is the sign of death and rebirth. So on an emotional level, this can happen many times in a lifetime where you go through a death of one way of emotionally operating and rebirth into something else. The way out of or to find peace in all this is through, like I just said, digging to the bottom of the emotional pain, getting some counseling or having someone to work through it with. Psychological work, hypnotherapy, energy healing, body work, even astrology, because 8th house rules astrology. It's very transformative for turning trauma into self-empowerment and actualizing that deep intuition. For me, because as I said, I've got 8th house moon as well. Astrology has brought this transformation that has brought me into my own sense of self-worth and power. So all this sort of stuff is very, very important to people with an 8th house moon. I just wanted to raise that for anybody else who's got it. And in fact, in most of my readings, I find, 80% of people I do readings for tend to have an 8th house moon. And I guess that's because perhaps they are drawn to that energy in me, that sympathetic energy where we share that 8th house karmic issues. So very, very important, 8th house moon. And also, as I mentioned earlier, the moon for Jim, as is my moon as well, is a lonely moon. This is when there's nothing to buffer the emotions. Like there's no, as I said, no planets in Cancer, no planets in Taurus to buffer the emotions. It's like a naked nerve. It makes us a bit emotionally reactive or emotionally sensitized. And it can take longer for people like us, people like myself, and people like Jim to find stability. It makes us more of a loner with introversion and a disconnect from other people. There's a feeling of I'm not understood and people don't get me and I just don't seem to connect. This can also happen when you're highly Neptunian as well. But that's not necessarily a bad thing. It doesn't mean you're necessarily going to be physically alone in life. Jim has had many relationships in his life. I've had one marriage. There is still a capacity to be with another person, but to be truly understood, to be truly seen, it's more difficult. And you are much more sensitized to your emotions and your feelings. They're easily triggered, shall we say. But it is a highly spiritual placement to have. It means when you have a lonely moon, which is not a very helpful title for it, but that's just the way it goes. It means that there is a big spiritual purpose for you in this life. So there is a big spiritual purpose for Jim in this life. There's going to be big spiritual growth for anyone with a lonely moon. And a longing for answers that you will find by looking within. And if you are familiar with a lot of Jim's more recent interviews, this is really starting to manifest for him. He is a highly spiritual person, and he is now beginning to share more and more about his spiritual understandings, and you can see the spiritual growth. If you look at early interviews, I sound like I'm obsessed, don't I? God. But I've done some research in order to present this to you today. If you look at early interviews with Jim compared to later interviews with Jim, there has been massive spiritual growth. Even in the gentleness of his persona now at 56 compared to what it was when he first came to prominence for his acting. He's done a lot of inner spiritual work that is natural, comes naturally with a lonely moon. So, but it's not without its challenges. It's not without its feeling of being a bit isolated in the world, and can also be an indication for depression or anxiety. So, if you've got this position, keep that in mind. There are reasons, and the reasons can often be found in astrology. There are reasons for this, and we've got to look at our lives as a bit of a yin-yang. Okay, I've got this lonely moon. It means this in terms of I feel alone. I feel like I'm not understood readily by people, and that I'm on some sort of different wavelength and my emotions are sensitized. But hey, the yang to my yin, or the yin to my yang, is that I am on a big spiritual growth journey this lifetime. I am stepping into something powerful. I have a spiritual quest that is important. Doubly so if it's in the 8th house, I might add. Back to the 8th house, when we've got this, it can make you an intense, passionate, emotional person. And it can indicate traumatic and dark experiences with big life reversals and big changes. And we've seen that Jim has come from a very difficult childhood to something of, huge worldwide acclaim. So, this is, again, 8th house, lonely moon stuff. It makes for a very powerful chart when combined as a singleton, when combined with those two mover and shaker planets, world changer planets, Uranus and Neptune. That alone, if that was the only thing that was happening in Jim's chart, it would give some pretty powerful impact. But now we move to the next bit. We have this phenomenal stellium. And I've talked a bit about this already, so I won't go into it in huge detail. But this phenomenal stellium of the Mars, Venus, Mars, Venus, Sun, Saturn, Jupiter, and Mercury, intense down in the house ruled by Gemini, the 3rd house, which is communications. And how do we communicate? Well, through writing, through media, through film, through photography, through anything of sort of that those means, those vehicles for communication that we use in our modern world. And Jim has this creative energy there. And there's also this creative energy in terms of Aquarius as the 4th house, because 3 of the planets sit there. And what does Aquarius rule? Genius. It's connected to Uranus. Geniusness, revolutionary, authenticity, and complete radicalization of who we are and what we do and what we represent. So this is very powerful, and this is the 4th house. Aquarius is the 4th house for Jim, and so there's this real connection to his heritage, his roots, his lineage by these things. His father, interestingly enough, was a big band, a saxophone player, and had his own big band in Canada, but unfortunately he lacked the courage to go beyond Canada and get into America, where the big money and big opportunities were. And in many senses, Jim was like, well, I'm going to take my entertainment capacity into a bigger realm, just in a way to honor his lineage, to honor his dad, who never quite had the courage to do that, and therefore ended up in a job where he wasn't happy, and lost his employment in his 50s, which sort of really debilitated Jim's family life. And his dad was unhappy. Even, he'd taken the road of, I'm going to do the ordinary thing. It doesn't make me happy, but it's stabilizing for my family. And yet it still didn't work out. And as Jim has said himself, why take that ride? Why not try and do what you want, what you desire, what you dream? Because if you can do the ordinary thing that you don't like and it still doesn't work out, well, you might as well do what you love. It makes perfect sense to me. And it's quite beautiful, actually. So there's a real connection to lineage and the lessons learned from Jim's lineage and heritage and family in this stellium and what this stellium represents. And of course, we've got rulerships there of, Venus is there, his relationships, and his 7th house and his 12th house spirituality is there as well. We've got Mars ruling the 6th house of everyday work and routines, and also Mars in the traditional rulership rules Scorpio. It's there too. So, everyday routines and himself, his body, his bodily journey through life, the 1st house, that's there. The Sun ruling career house, Leo. We've got Saturn, who's ruling both of those houses. So Saturn's in his own rulership. Jim's actually about to experience in the coming couple of years his 2nd Saturn return, which will be an interesting time for him. And so Saturn is there in his rulership of the 3rd and the 4th houses. Jupiter, which rules the 5th house of entertainment, is there as part of this creative energy, this stellium. Stelliums are about having there's a spiritual mission with stelliums as well. You are here, you've got a massive stellium like this, you are here for a spiritual purpose, a creative purpose, and you've got this directed energy in the one spot in your chart that's all about manifesting something new, bringing something amazing and different to the world. So this is playing out a number of times throughout Jim's chart. And of course, we've talked about Mercury, ruler of the 8th house, and the 11th house of large groups of people. And Jim has reached masses of people. In fact, Mercury ruling the house of large groups of people and rewards for efforts, gains and rewards for the efforts we've made, is expanded by Jupiter. And so Jupiter is expanding all those Mercury things for Jim. So very, very powerful stellium. They are the big players that I see happening in Jim's chart. Now, in the interest of trying to keep this at an acceptable level, because I do talk on, and I'm so sorry about that, I do want to now move on, and I won't talk about the nodes. Often in a reading I would do that, but in the interest of saving time, I won't talk about the nodes. I won't talk about the relationship axis or the characters, any of that sort of thing that I might usually talk about. But now I want to look at some interesting events in Jim's life and what was happening in terms of progression. So I'm going to switch charts, and we're going to look at a couple of Jim's interesting life events. So this first chart that we're looking at is the chart of Jim's, there's his natal chart as seen in the inside, so it's going to look very familiar to the chart we just looked at. But on the outside, we've got the progressions and transits from the year 1987. Now, I haven't gone date specific with this. I've just sort of looking pretty roughly. Okay, so the green indicators around the outside are the progressions, and the red indicators are the transits. We look at the further outer planets for transit influence because they pack the most punch. And we look at the inner planets in the progressions. This is when you look at planets moving 1 degree in the chart for each day of life. And so we're looking at these progressions, and they are represented by green, and they are mostly, well, they are just in this chart, just the inner planets from Mars, Venus, Mercury down. So what happened for Jim in the year 1987? Well, this is a relationship theme happening here. In 1987, Jim married Melissa Woolman, and she was actually 3 months pregnant roughly when they married in March 1987, and Jim's daughter was born in September 1987. So let's see what was happening here. Well, progressed Venus, if you look down at the bottom, progressed Venus was conjunct with Jim's IC. Now, when we're looking at this chart here, it's kind of sitting a little off from the IC, but the chart table, which I haven't included in this picture, I'm sorry, says that they are within 1 degree of each other. So the progressed Venus, and Venus represents relationships, Venus represents partnerships. When it's conjunct an angle, it can bring marriage. And Jim was very young when he got married, and Venus represents youthful female energy. The moon represents the more, not matriarchal, but it's the older woman. So in this case, Jim married very young to a young woman when his progressed Venus was hitting on an angle, the IC, down in the fourth house. Also, though, it's interesting to note that the progressed moon was sitting up in the sign of Taurus, which happens to be Jim's 7th house of marriage. And so there's one indicator for marriage there, which is the Venus, progressed Venus, and another indicator for marriage, which is the progressed moon. Now, I should point out Venus rules Taurus, which is the 7th house. So the 7th house lord was conjunct the IC, the 4th house cusp, indicating a marriage. The moon is the planet of motherhood and being a mother. And where was the moon? The moon was in the 7th house, and she was pregnant at the time they got married. So motherhood in the house of marriage. And so this is the time when Jim's daughter was born. And I just, flicking back through the progressions and the transits, I thought, this is a really interesting indicator of what happened in his life, as you can see it in the chart. And he had, because of this stellium, he had all these progressed planets sitting in the 4th house of home, heritage, lineage, roots. And obviously, he's brung a new life into the world in his daughter. And so he's continuing on that heritage, that lineage, that family. There's Mars, there's Mercury, there's the Sun, and there's Venus, all progressed and sitting in that house. So this is the first chart that I wanted to look at that shows a particular particular event in Jim's life. And now the second chart I wanted to look at, that was 1987. Now we want to look at 1994. And this is the year that Jim got his big break with the film Ace Ventura. So let's take a peek at that. And here we've got, again, a chart that shows progressions and transits that were occurring against his natal positions. Now, this was a monster year in terms of transits and progressions for Jim. What was going on? Okay, so transiting Jupiter. Check out where transiting Jupiter was. Smack bang on Jim's Neptune, which is pretty much conjunct his ascendant. Jupiter rules Pisces traditionally, and Neptune rules Pisces in a modern sense. So where's Pisces? 5th house, house of entertainments, house of the superstar, you know, that it's very Leonian energy. And so what's going on? These two have connected. Transiting Jupiter, expanding the Neptune energy, expanding his ascendant, you know, who he is, his person, the way he shows up in the world. And coming from the 5th house, as a ruler of the 5th house. The two rulers of the 5th house were connecting together. What else? The transiting North Node, which in natal terminology is sitting up in his 10th house of career. Now, I wasn't going to talk about the North Node, but in a very quick sense, the North Node represents what we're rising up into in this lifetime, what we are becoming, what we are craving more of. More career success, more career recognition and public accolades, blah, blah, blah. Where was the transiting North Node? Also in the 1st house, near, not on Neptune, but within that within that 1st house of Jim. The 1st house represents you. It represents the person that you are and the way you show up in the world. So Jim's North Node coming from the house of career in his 1st house. This was a time, the whole duration of the North Node in Scorpio at that time would have been a building of career momentum for Jim in a big, big way. What else was happening? Transiting Neptune and transiting Uranus were crossing Jim's stellium. Now, this is really important. They had been triggering the stellium probably from the time that they hit on that Jim's Mars at 17 degrees Capricorn. But in 1994, they were hitting on his Sun at 26 degrees. So Uranus is coming from the 10th house of career, and the Sun rules the 10th house of career. And then Neptune is coming from the 1st house of who Jim is, plus Neptune is acting. Neptune is, becoming the other character, becoming other people, just acting in general. Bang on the Lord of his 10th house of career. So this was happening. This is really powerful because remember those two planets in Jim's natal chart were really kick-ass. The other thing that was happening, the progressed Sun, again, Lord of the career house. The progressed house was conjunct his 5th house cusp. Now, it's perhaps a little hard to see in this chart image that I've shared, but the symbol for the Sun is sitting a little ways off because of all the IC notations. But the little green line that represents where the Sun actually is, and if I had the table chart to tell you what degree, you would know it's sitting on the whole sign cusp about to move into Pisces. So in 1994, just as Jim had his big break with Ace Ventura, the Sun, the progressed Sun, ruler of his 10th house, was about to enter the 5th house of career, the 5th house of entertainment, the 5th house of pleasure in terms of what we do for fun, what we do for joy, what we do for happiness. It's also love, it's also romance, it's also children, it's all those other things. But the connection here is all these things relating to career momentum are occurring for Jim. Also at this same time, and this is the last little point I want to indicate to you, the progressed moon. It's right up there in the 10th house. And it's, guess what, it's conjunct the MC, Uranus, and the North Node. So this is also powerful. The moon is very manifesting. It's very karmic. And it will be bringing for Jim, or it did bring for Jim, a lot of karmic manifestation into being, into play, by transiting over his North Node and his MC, and also that very pivotal Uranus. So that's 1994 for Jim and what was occurring there. So that is what I see in terms of some of the key life events that unfolded for Jim throughout the 90s that kind of set him up in a way for his future career, which has then gone from strength to strength. I mean, there's been a couple of films that perhaps didn't do as well as he might have anticipated. There's been some times of real struggle with mental health, and when I say mental health, just depression and anxiety, which are common to the majority of people at some point in their lives, but particularly people with that high sensitivity like Jim has. And so now what do I see in terms of what is happening for Jim in the future? Now this is really, I really wanted to just talk briefly about this. I don't want to go into a great, oh, this is what's going to happen, da-da-da-da-da. But one of the things that I see occurring for Jim in the next month or two is that the planet of Uranus, which is his, coming from his career house, it rules his 4th house of lineage and home and heritage, is about to move into Taurus, which is his 7th house of relationship. So when we see Uranus transiting anybody's 7th house, what this means is that somebody can come into your life to shake you out of a rut. Relationships can change in a dynamic way. Now, with the 7th house, this can be business partnerships. This can be anything contractual that you've got with another person, such as buying a property. You might have signed a contract to, be co-owners of an estate or something. But it's also obviously marriage relationships where there is a contract signed, and we see committed partnerships through the 7th house. So these sorts of relationships can change in a dynamic way. No matter what the relationship though, the change is going to be fast and it's going to be life-changing, because this is an angular house, so it's very, very important, very pivotal. And whenever Uranus transits an angular house, look out. Life is going to go 180 degrees for you in the best way, because the purpose of Uranus is to liberate. You can't do fake relationships anymore. You can't do superficial relationships anymore when Uranus is in the 7th house for you. Conventional relationships are not going to be your thing. There's going to be the potential for relationships to be long distance. It's quite common when you've got Uranus natally there or transiting there that you'll establish a relationship that's long distance, or relationships that are on again and off again and on again and off again. That's probably the lower manifestation of that energy. But there'll also be perhaps a breaking of relationship taboos. I won't go into that. I'll leave that one to your imagination. If you've got Uranus there natally, it means that you're going to probably have more than one marriage, without a doubt, and not have conventional relationships. But the whole idea of Uranus's transit to the 7th house is there's going to be a release of being stuck in some way. This person's going to come along and change your life. And so Jim's got that to look forward to. That is going to be really beneficial for him going forward into the future. Whether the relationship lasts or not, it all depends on what Saturn is doing in the chart at the time, because Uranus relationships can come and change our lives massively. shake us up, give us some liberation and freedom. That's what Uranus does. But they don't last long unless they've got the stabilizing influence of Saturn. And so let's have a quick peek. Well, what is Saturn doing? Saturn is in the sign of Capricorn, about to start transiting Jim's stellium. And this is going to bring some structure. You know, Saturn's there for 2.5 years. And when Uranus moves in May, he's going to be there for 7 years. So this coming 2.5 year period for Jim, there's going to be some, structure being set up. And it's in regard to Mars, which is going to be transited by Saturn. And what does Mars rule? 6th house, that's everyday routines, health and well-being, ability to fix things, and unfortunately it can also mean court cases, that sort of stuff. But then you've also got Venus and the Sun. So Sun rules career, and Venus is ruling, again, the 11th house of, rewards and gains for effort put in. So there can be a reward for the effort Jim has made in sort of his spiritual growth at this time. And he might receive some sort of karmic reward for that when Saturn transits, but it's also more likely to put some structure in terms of relationships, because Venus rules the 7th house. So yes, Jim is going to get this shake up from some kind of a committed partnership that's going to change his life and revolutionize his life. And Saturn is going to bring structure that will give some stability in the long term. Saturn is the long haul. And so when Saturn transits the Lord of Jim's 7th house, there is a capacity for this radical new relationship, whatever that form that takes, to receive some long enduring benefit, because Saturn's going to be involved there too. And I might just add, because it's very, very interesting, Stephen Forrest, who is a marvelous teacher of astrology, talks about the meaning, the evolutionary intent of Venus in Capricorn, which is what Jim has. And it's so interesting. The evolutionary intent of Venus in Capricorn is to form grown-up relationships, and I'm quoting here from his writings, to form grown-up relationships based on integrity, commitment, and maturity in reaction to prior life dynamics that involved failure and abandonment, that were driven essentially by the immaturity of one or both partners. So in essence, it's saying there was, a prior life where there was abandonment or failure by either Jim or another partner, and now, because of the immaturity of either Jim or a partner in past lives, and now he's come into this life to karmically deal with that and to work towards having a mature relationship. And so Venus in Capricorn, when triggered by the stability and structure of Saturn, and perhaps the radicalization and liberation and freedom that Uranus brings, this could be a relationship for Jim that lasts a lifetime, that or the rest of his lifetime, that brings that karmic maturity that he may have been waiting his whole life to experience in terms of relationships. So this is an exciting time that I see coming up for Jim in that sense. What other things are happening? Well, really interestingly, this period of time over the next few years is going to be really interesting for all of us, because we're all going to have Saturn and Pluto joined in the sky, at the end of this 2.5 year period, and Jupiter will join there as well. So we've got this trio of intense, powerful, manifesting and ego smashing Pluto planets. But for Jim, this is going to be happening on this intense stellium that he's got. And at the end of these degrees of Capricorn and the beginning of these degrees of Aquarius, all this Jupiter combined with Saturn combined with Pluto energy. So there could be, because of the condensed planets in his stellium there's going to be a bang, 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 bang triggering of all these different aspects of his life that are going to receive Pluto self-actualization and self-empowerment perhaps crisis experiences that transform him. That's what Pluto does, and Pluto smashes the ego away, whatever he transits, and particularly with the Pluto square, which has occurred for Jim in the past. I won't go into that. But certainly the ego that's what Pluto does, is the ego smasher, the ego transformer. So it's a very internal energy. But also Saturn and Jupiter are physical world manifestations, and they're going to bang on those points as well, hit on those points too. So you know, we could take hypothetical stabs at what might occur here. Like there's going to be impacts to Jim's sixth house of everyday routines, of health, of court cases, of fixing problems, healing. That's the Mars energy, and Mars also rules his ascendant, himself, his body. There's going to be impacts to Venus, his relationships, and large groups of people, and rewards and gains. I'm just quickly going through the houses they rule. The Sun, there's going to be impacts to that, the career. The Saturn, which is fourth house for Jim, and heritage, roots, lineage, and third house, communications, ability to, reach the masses through writing, through speaking, through film and TV and so forth. And then a little later on, Mercury ruling the eighth house, and the very spiritual house, the eighth house, and Mercury also ruling. Sorry, I've been interpreting. Sorry about this. Yeah, ruling the eighth house, and ruling for Jim the 11th house, Virgo energy. And so sorry, I have talked a little bit with my whole sign astrology, and also with the Libra energy there of the being the 11th house as well. I just realized that I may have confused things a little bit there. Sorry about that. And then Jupiter, fifth house. So all these things, practically Jim's whole chart is going to be triggered in the next, few years by the Pluto, Jupiter, Saturn transit that's coming up in the next couple of years. So what can Jim do? What's the remedy? Well, the remedy to deal with this energy for any of us is to focus on the positive qualities, to bring about the positive qualities of the planets involved, rather than the sort of the lower manifestations, rather than, living in fear with Saturn, or, succumbing to crisis with Pluto. We want to manifest the higher manifestations of this. So what can Jim do? And that's a really, really good question. But what I see and how I interpret this is that we've got Neptune as such a strong planet. And Neptune is a healing energy. Neptune is a compassionate energy. We want to use that because it rules Jim. It is the dominant planet in his first house. So we want to use that, that Neptune compassion, that Neptune charitableness, and giving nature. And we want to use it in terms of the other planets involved. So we're using it because it rules Jim's chart in such a powerful way. And what else is going on? Well, we've got Jupiter, that is connected to children. And we've got Pluto, which is connected to sort of abuses, and very much connected to sexual abuse. So that's I'm getting to a point, don't worry. And then Saturn is structure. So all those things, I see that Jim can really use those energies to channel benefic energy at this time of these transits. And I'm saying this because Neptune is in his fifth house, which, yes, rules entertainment and romance and love, but it also rules children. And I see that if Jim was to channel that Neptunian charity into helping children, Jupiter transiting through that stellium at that time, into perhaps helping children come out of abuse or be helped out of abusive situations. And I'm thinking of, say, children who are trafficked into sexual slavery, and or exploited in some way. That's Pluto energy. Perhaps Jim could create some sort of compassionate foundation. Perhaps Jim could create some Saturnian style structure that would help this. So I'm hoping this makes sense. He's got Jupiter, which rules children, Pluto, which rules, abuse in this situation, and Saturn, which rules structure, and Neptune is in his 5th house of children, and Neptune is compassion and charitableness. And I see that Jim might be able to alleviate the intense energy on his stellium by manifesting something positive, by helping, by being charitable, by giving, because that's his nature. He's sensitive, he's caring. This is that Neptunian nature, and he can really utilize this to lift him to the higher positive energy of Neptune, the higher positive energy of Jupiter, of Saturn, and also transforming the energy of Pluto by doing something positive towards those things, and utilizing all those energies to create some benefit to the world, to bring something new and wonderful through that creative stellium that blesses people. And, I really feel that if I was, this is the kind of thing, if I was in an astrological reading with Jim, I would want to offer, here's one option that you might like to consider that might help with a difficult transit that's coming up. Let's use this energy and push it into the higher manifestation to bring about good things. So that's just one idea that I see when I look at this transit that Jim could utilize to make it a powerful time. Really, like, he has the spiritual ability, he has the compassionate ability, and the resources to be able to bring this about. So that's what I see in terms of the transits for Jim's chart that are coming up. And, just looking quickly, he's got the MC, his highest point in his chart, conjunct Regulus. Regulus was the point of the American eclipse. This energy is starting to dissipate, but over the last few months would have been a very powerful thing for Jim to be experiencing that, eclipse on his midheaven. Change has been brewing for Jim. Change has been coming, and now he's stepping into that energy. So it's an exciting time for him. So thanks so much for listening to me ramble through a number of different charts and a number of different placements and looking at Jim Carrey's chart.
So there you go. Thank you to Jim Carrey for letting us wander through his chart today. And I pray that this has been a blessing for everyone who's joined this journey. And you've been able to, I hope that you've been able to gain insights into your own life through looking at this chart to understand some key components more and how the synchronicities work and join together and can play out. And so if you've gained any insight from this little video, then leave a comment at the end. We'd love to know what you've learned. But also, if you can see something in Jim's chart that is interesting, that that I have missed or have not had time to go into, then by all means share it in the comments below as well, because this is a great platform for learning, for understanding, and for increasing our own knowledge. So by all means share, and we'll have, in that way, our community through Lada will help each other to learn and grow in our abilities with astrology. So thanks so much for your time, and if you haven't subscribed to Lada's channel, do so, and check out all the readers who do regular videos and give so much of themselves to bless you and to give you extra knowledge and understanding of that heavenly language, astrology.